Why are we here? Relax, I'm not talking about the meaning of life. We would certainly be here all day if we tried to get into that. But literally, why are we here, or why am I here in church? Surely there are other ways to spend our time, but something has drawn us here together in this space, in this way. And I would guess that whatever brought us here is something even bigger than our need for human connection, because you can find that in other places too. What I'm interested in knowing is, why is anyone drawn to the Christian path, the path of Jesus? Because he himself said it would not be easy, so why follow someone who said his way was challenging when you can go play golf or something? Seriously, why follow Jesus? Because he could walk on water? Because he could turn a small meal into enough food to feed thousands? Because he could heal sick people with only touch? In the early days, I do think some people followed him, literally followed him from place to place just to watch him perform miracles. They were in awe of him, and they hoped some of his magic dust would sprinkle their lives with divine blessing. These days, I think people have other motivations for following Jesus. For example, I have heard people call Jesus their ticket to heaven, which seems a little bit strange to me, since Jesus' teachings were all about how we live this life here and now. He actually spent very little time talking about what happens when we die. His main concern seemed to be how to live. If Jesus had only cared about what happens to the soul, he would not have spent his final 3 years on the planet taking care of people's bodies and teaching his disciples to do likewise. Following Jesus, it isn't just a personal journey to experience salvation or divine blessing on an individual level. That very well may be a pleasant side effect of following Jesus, but the whole point of following him, the reason his original disciples followed him, is because Jesus showed people how to achieve salvation on a collective level. Salvation, meaning healing and wholeness. Now, if you're thinking, wait, I thought salvation means that Jesus saved us from sin, you are correct. Jesus showed people how to achieve salvation from the sins of greed, oppression, violence, cruelty, discrimination, resource hoarding, all the sins that stand in the way of collective thriving. Another way to describe this collective salvation is with the old Hebrew word shalom, which means that everyone has what they need to be whole. And when we collectively follow Jesus, we collectively experience shalom, which means everyone in the community is thriving and healing and becoming whole. I think the most dedicated followers of Jesus in his time were the people who understood this. They followed Jesus not because he gave them personal privileges or elevated status. Oh, he kept them busy serving others, not being served. But in the serving, they were seeing a transformation of their communities. Jesus showed people how to feed the poor, tend the sick, befriend the lonely, and welcome the outcasts. It was the hardest work his followers had ever done, but they kept on following him because they were seeing how Jesus' way was actually making things better for the downtrodden people, their people. Jesus reached the people who were struggling to survive and showed them how they could thrive. But it was never about individual success. It had to be about the entire community, because no one thrives unless everyone is thriving. That's the simple idea of shalom. Possibly the best story to illustrate that idea is that time when Jesus made his disciples feed a multitude, and remember, all they had was a tiny bit of food. Do you recall 5 small loaves of bread and a couple fish? Not much, but somehow it was enough. Thousands were served, and 12 baskets of leftovers were gathered up. 12 representing the 12 tribes of Israel, symbolizing everyone who followed the God Jesus embodied. When they followed that example of sharing, there was enough for the entire community to thrive. God's abundance for God's people, thanks be to God. But those who followed Jesus would soon see that even their idea of community had to expand if they were to truly live into God's will of shalom for all. So not very long after the feeding of the Jewish multitude, Jesus and his disciples found themselves out of the country in Gentile territory. meaning non-Jewish people. It was the northern regions of Tyre and Sidon, home to the remnants of the Canaanite people that their ancestors had displaced. That was an uncomfortable place for them to be, given the history of genocide that had not been forgotten. Even worse, Jesus' people seemed to have a lingering feeling of superiority over the Canaanites. After all, who had won that war? Surely that meant God favored the Israelites, no? We hear this disturbing attitude of superiority in Matthew's account of Jesus' time in this strange place. No sooner had he arrived, but a Canaanite woman from that region came out and started shouting, "Have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David. My daughter is tormented by a demon." But Jesus did not answer her at all. And his disciples came and urged him, saying, "Send her away, for she keeps shouting after us." He answered, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." But she came and knelt before him, saying, "Lord, help me." He answered, "It is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." She said, "Yes, Lord, even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table." Then Jesus answered her, "Woman, great is your faith. Let it be done for you as you wish." And her daughter was healed from that moment. This is one of my favorite stories about Jesus, even though it's kind of terrible. Did you notice it starts out awful? The first time that Canaanite woman asked Jesus for mercy, he didn't answer her at all. That's appalling, isn't it? Yet it would not have fazed the first century Jewish audience for which Matthew was writing, not one bit. They would have nodded in affirmation. "That's right, Jesus, you do not talk to a Canaanite woman. She is not one of us." That's exactly what the disciples were thinking when they encouraged Jesus to just send her away. She keeps shouting after us. What a nuisance. Who did she think she was anyway, this Canaanite woman? Didn't she know she was dealing with a holy man, a rabbi, someone who must not defile himself by getting too close to her? Gentiles were unclean, you know. So Jesus put her in her place, reminding her that he was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, meaning people who followed the God of Abraham, not her or anyone like her. She was not as concerned, neither she nor her sick daughter. But she kept pestering him, even kneeling, meaning if she was going to be escorted out, she would have to be picked up and carried. It would not be pretty. Jesus tried to reason with her, reminding her of her lowly status compared to the children of Israel whom he served. It's not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs. If you are ever going to quote Jesus, please, please do not use that line. It is not his finest moment. And the huge irony is the only reason he is even in that Gentile place full of dirty Canaanite dogs is that he has just offended his own religious leaders back home by scolding them for their hypocritical obsession with their hand washing and dietary restrictions meant to keep them ritually pure. Jesus rightly pointed out to them that none of that stuff meant anything at all when the harmful words coming from their mouths were what really made them unclean. According to Jesus, if the religious folk really had pure hearts, they would only use kind words. And then he goes and calls this Canaanite woman and all of her people dogs. Friends, this is a problem. But the resolution to the problem is why I love this story so much. This Canaanite woman of all people reminds Jesus that it is possible for both the children of Israel and the dogs, her people, to be fed. In short, she challenges Jesus on his limited idea of blessing and abundance, and this is the moment when Jesus' own theology of God's grace expands. As his disciples watch in silent, shocked amazement, Jesus grows in understanding and offers immediate blessing to someone from the wrong faith tradition and the wrong side of a border. Immediately, the notion of shalom is extended to people outside of the inner circle of their faith. And followers of Jesus will never be the same from this moment on. Now they are obligated to view the entire world as their community and all people as worthy of blessing. Jesus would say it quite clearly a little closer to the end of his life as he would commission his disciples to go into the world and show people how it works to follow him. And later, the book of Acts will show us how they did just that, going into faraway places, Gentile places, because the healing Jesus offered was meant for the whole world that God loved and still loves. For me, the story of the Canaanite woman is like a hinge, the piece that allows the good news to open up from a small-scale reformation of one faith tradition to a wide-scale vision of what the whole world could be like if people learned the ways that Jesus taught. Jesus didn't want only some people to experience healing. Jesus gave his followers a prescription that could be used all over the world. And that, for me, is why I feel compelled to follow Jesus. It is not because I want something lovely to happen to me after my time on earth is finished. It's not because I think I'll personally experience blessing and God's favor simply because I call myself Christian. I choose to follow Jesus because I truly see his way as the path to wholeness and thriving, not for some, but for all. For those aspiring to follow Jesus, this story of the Canaanite woman is a reminder to draw the circle wider and look beyond the limiting ways we might define community as we realize that no one thrives unless everyone thrives. Our actions have impacts that are felt far beyond our perception, for better or for worse. This is encouraging and also terrifying. But we do have the obligation to think of the wider community, even the global community, if we are serious about following Jesus. And that is the beginning of our why as the church. We are a community dedicated to thriving. We support each other emotionally, spiritually, even physically and financially when the need arises. If some of us are not doing well, the rest of us come alongside and help. We pray, we call, we visit, we bring meals. That's where we begin as followers of Jesus, by nurturing one another. But it is not our end goal. If all we ever did was to take care of each other, that would be beautiful, but it wouldn't be a complete fulfillment of our commitment to following Jesus, because of the Canaanite woman and how she stretched Jesus' understanding of his own purpose, and by extension that of his followers. We are all compelled to look around and ask, who are the underdogs outside of our little network of care and concern? Those are precisely the people Jesus calls us as his church to serve. Let's do a little exercise together. If you don't mind, close your eyes and imagine someone who is an underdog, someone who might be saying, like the Canaanite woman said to Jesus, "Have mercy." So what does that person need? And how might we, as followers of Jesus, collectively respond to that need? You can open your eyes. This is how we pray this week, my friends. As we seek to follow Jesus, let us imagine, how can we work toward the goal of healing in our community? Not only our community of faith, however we define it, but the wider community to which we are connected. In so doing, we will be following Jesus on his mission of bringing about God's will here on earth. God's will that everyone should have access to what they need, not only to survive, but yes, to thrive. We start where we are and we encourage others to do likewise where they are, because if all of our faith communities everywhere did this, imagine, it would be a true gift of healing for the world. Shalom, my friends.